Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where I help you understand how we navigated our homeschool high school experience. Now we opted to test our children out of high school early so they could go directly to community college. Now there are pros and cons to doing this, so I encourage you to check out the other videos in this playlist. You can find the link to that playlist in the description box below. Now, the first thing I want to share with you is the curriculum that we use primarily while we were homeschooling our children. And we did follow a Waldorf philosophy, which meant that I was starting my students in grade 1 at around the age of 7, which is roughly about a year behind their peers. That meant that by the time they were in 9th grade, they were doing 8th grade content. And so they really started high school at about 10th grade. At that point, we opted to test them out for a number of reasons. The first reason is that we saw other homeschoolers in our area who were doing this method back when we first started homeschooling. We really liked this idea and we kept it in the back of our mind so that by the time our children were hitting their middle school years, we were exploring that option to test them out early and go directly to community college. Another reason why we opted to do community college versus high school is that I didn't feel I could give them the rigor that they needed at the high school level. Now, high school teachers are trained in single subject areas, and they are teaching high school, not the younger grades, versus a teacher teaching in middle school or elementary school is certified in TK to 8th grade, so they could teach any of those grades. Versus a teacher who does early education, they're also specifically trained in early childhood development. So because each of these areas has a unique approach, I knew that for the high school experience, that was something that I would prefer to either outsource or to send them to a school. I didn't feel like I was capable of doing the high school classes. Certainly, I could do some of them based on my own background and my own education, but I didn't feel that I would have the time, especially with my older children, because I was still homeschooling younger children, or I had toddlers or babies or expecting. So I definitely didn't think it was a possibility for my oldest students. Certainly, I could revisit that with my younger student. I am still homeschooling one student. My other 3 children have already graduated. So it might be more of a possibility now with my youngest, but it certainly wasn't something that I was thinking of doing with my older children, considering how much responsibility I still had with my younger students. And I did not want to shortchange my high schoolers at a point where I really felt they needed to be challenged academically. I really wanted them to be in a setting where that could be accomplished. Another reason why we decided not to homeschool during high school was the accessibility of labs. I didn't think that I would be able to put together labs for biology, chemistry, even physics in a way that you could in a high school setting or in a college setting. So I didn't want to, again, shortchange my children by not being able to provide that environment for them. And the other classes that I didn't think that I could do, that we certainly could have outsourced 1 or 2 classes, like foreign language, for instance, I did not have the skills to do that. And so for those reasons, we decided to look more seriously at outsourcing their high school experience. Now, we could have outsourced by, say, doing online classes, or even seeing if our local high school would allow for a few classes that my students could take on site with them. Or I've seen some families do this, especially when it comes to sports or music, teaming up with the local high school to see if their student can still take some of those classes. Now it's kind of tricky because in California, we're either homeschooling through the public school system or through the private school system. And so it's going to be a little bit challenging if you want to outsource some of those classes in a brick and mortar school if you're not a full-time student there. So you might have to look at other options, or in some cases, I've seen families just send their children to high school even though they've homeschooled up until that point, so they have access to some of those resources. One other thing, though, is that you always have access to the resources that a public school can provide you when it comes to special education or say like hearing tests or vision tests, any of the things that a school would do to assess your child, you as a homeschooler still have access to those resources. So as a side note, especially in the state of California, I don't know what it's like in other states. And also when it comes to exiting high school early, you will have to look at it state to see what the requirements are, because even now the requirements have changed since the time that we did this with our older children. So for a number of reasons, we decided not to homeschool our high school students by either putting together our own classes or outsourcing with our local high school or doing online classes, which at the time when we first started homeschooling weren't available. So now we're looking at other options. What can we do during this time? Doing community college courses was always something that we had considered, and now it was time to actually make that happen. So how do you make that happen as a high school student? Now you can take community college courses as a high school student. You can even take them as a middle school student, and I believe that you can even take them when you're younger. Now you will of course need parental permission, school permission, and college permission, because there are some courses that you cannot take as a high schooler or middle schooler at the college level for safety. They won't let you do any of the sports for safety. And as a parent, there may be other classes that you don't want your students involved in as well. So you will have to look through either the course catalog and just make sure that those classes are ones that you want your student to take. The other thing is that community college is intended for community college students, and usually community college students are either 17 or 18 years and older. It's not meant for younger students. So safety is important when you're considering sending your children to community college, whether they stay enrolled as a high school student or whether they choose to exit out early. So in the college environment, you're looking at coursework that can be adult in nature. You're looking at an environment that is definitely adult in nature as well, especially at the community college level. You're looking at both students and adults who are returning to school. So you're looking at that environment that you need to consider as well. And so for that, we decided not to send our children to community college until they looked like they could be there. And so that was post-puberty for my children. So after they had gone through their growth spurt and looked like they were mature young adults, that's when we decided to send them to community college. So that wasn't until about 10th grade, the end of 9th grade, thereabouts, is when we felt comfortable sending them on campus. Now, if you decide to do online community college classes, then you can decide for yourself whether you want to send them younger or whether even it doesn't matter to you that they could be younger in that college environment. For us, we did not want them to look like they didn't belong from a social perspective. We just thought it would be safer for them to look like they actually belong there as college students. So now my children are ready to take their community college courses. Which courses do they take? How do they actually take them? And do they want to test out or stay in high school? There are a lot of people who choose to stay in high school while taking community college classes and end up graduating high school with a high school diploma as well as an AA degree. If you exit high school early, you will not be getting a diploma unless you go back and get your GED. And so when you exit high school early with the intention of going to college, it's really important to have an idea of the end game, because if you are exiting high school early and then you decide not to complete community college or university, then you're going to end up with no college degree and you would have missed out on getting your high school diploma. So when we decided to exit our students from high school, we knew for sure that we wanted them to attend university, at which point they would be able to get a diploma, granted, if they graduated. And if they were going to community college, they could get an AA degree, which for us wasn't as important because we knew that we wanted them to go to university and end up with a bachelor's degree. And so with a bachelor's degree, your AA degree doesn't mean very much, neither does your high school diploma either. Usually employers are looking at your highest level of education. And there are some cases, like if you have a master's and a PhD and they differ a little bit from your bachelor's, it's possible that an employer might look at all three. But for the most part, you're looking at the highest level of education. So if you know that you're going to go on and do a college degree, then your high school diploma, of course, isn't going to be as necessary. And so for us, exiting high school early was okay that they weren't getting a high school diploma, since they were going to be getting a university degree instead. Now, for those students who decide they want to remain in high school and take community college courses, it actually can work in your favor for your high school diploma, because in general, community college classes count double towards your credits for high school. And they definitely count for your requirements, since they are higher than your high school courses. Now, of course, this is going to vary state to state, and there will be some rules depending on the actual classes that you take. So I encourage you to check out your local state rules as well as your community college rules, and also check out the universities that you want your students to apply to. Check out what their requirements are as well, because you don't want to do all this work intending to carry over those credits to your university or use them to transfer or use them as coursework for high school, just to come to find out that your college or your university isn't going to accept them. So there is a lot of due diligence that you have to do, a lot of research that you have to do, and honestly, you really need to be your child's best advocate in all of this, because as we were going through this, we found that a lot of the counselors may have had differing ideas, understanding of the rules, different information, and it really took a long time to navigate that successfully, because we were getting a lot of information that was contradictory. And a lot of times we found information in the most unlikely random places that ended up being really helpful for us. And so it was quite a journey navigating this for our children. If you decide to exit out of high school early and go directly to community college rather than staying in high school and taking those community college classes, you certainly can do that. It will make a number of things easier, but you won't get your high school diploma. And there are tests that you have to take in order to exit high school. So now if you're looking at, well, what are the pros and cons of exiting high school? Why can't I just stay in high school and take my community college classes? This is the best of both worlds. And yes, that is really the best of both worlds. You still get your high school experience, and you can still get the rigor of those college courses if maybe your high school doesn't have it, especially if you're homeschooling. If you're going to continue to homeschool throughout high school and you want them to graduate high school, and you're like, well, I want to do all the classes, but I really can't do, say, biology and chemistry because I don't have access to those labs. Well, this is really a great way to do both. You can have those community college classes for those classes that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do at home, but you can still do your homeschool. The only issue that you might encounter, and that's an issue that we encountered, was access to the classes that you actually need. When you are taking community college courses, there are a couple of things to remember. Firstly, those grades, they're going to end up on your transcript. So as soon as you start a community college class, you have to take it seriously. Those grades are going to end up on your transcript, and your GPA, that grade is going to get included in your GPA if you're going to be transferring to a university. So you really have to mind those classes and take classes that you think your children or your students can handle, and maybe not just like, oh, I'm just going to try this out. It's okay. I'm just going to get my child used to college. It's okay if he doesn't do so well. I don't want him to be stressed out. And then come to find out that actually that grade was really important for your GPA or for getting into another course. And so I want to remind you that those classes, even if you were taking them in 9th grade, they're going to show up on your college transcript. All right, so now it's like, well, what kind of classes should you take at that age if you're just wanting to sort of like, say, dip your toes into the college experience? Well, if you don't have a plan for your college experience and you just want to take classes just for fun, but you're going to stay in high school, then you can explore whatever classes you want and just make sure that you get good grades in them. If you want to take those community college classes for the purpose of transferring to university or for the purpose of exiting high school early, then you're going to want to be very dedicated about the coursework that you're taking. For our students, we started them in math and English specifically because those were the ones that required the most prerequisites and transfer classes so that they could go to the universities that we were hoping them to go to. So we're in California and we were choosing between Cal State schools, so California State Universities, or UC schools, University of California schools, universities. And we were sort of just narrowing it down to those two tracks. When you are looking at coursework that's going to be transferable to university, you want to be looking at classes that are going to be transferable. Some classes are going to be transferable to UC schools, but not Cal State schools. And likewise, you're going to have classes that are transferable to Cal State schools and not UC schools. So you have to know what those courses are because there are some courses that are accepted by both universities, both Cal State universities and UC universities. And then, of course, there are the private colleges, out-of-state colleges, so there's a lot to consider. Now, I had one friend who said that she wanted to keep all of her options open to her child and not narrow it down. And what ended up happening was that there were too many choices and you sort of have to narrow it down to one path because then you end up taking too many classes and you might end up spending twice as long there just so that you can keep all of your doors open. Very quickly, you have to start closing some doors and narrowing down your choices. You would be doing this in high school as well if you were choosing, say, the AG track, university track, or just wanting to graduate from high school and not go on to college. It will inform the classes that you're taking. So you sort of have to narrow that down and start to decide what you actually want to have happen after your community college years. And honestly, you really have to figure this out in 9th grade. You really have to know in 9th grade what the next 8 years are going to look like, what you're aiming for the next 8 years. And it seems like a really big thing to think about, but the sooner you can lock that in at around 9th grade, and doesn't mean that you have to have your college picked out, your university picked out, your major picked out, but you do have to answer for yourself some really important questions of, is my child going to go to college? Is my child going to go to university? Does my child want a degree? Are they going to need a degree, or are they going to choose trade school, or are they going to choose something entirely different? You need to answer those questions so that you know how to plan out the next 4 to 8 years of their education. For us, we knew that we wanted our children to have a university degree. So our efforts in their high school years was to get them the community college courses and credits necessary to transfer to university. Now, there are easier ways to do that, and there are more challenging ways to do that. So let's talk about the route that we chose that we feel was the one that more likely ensured that they would be admitted to university. So the path that we chose was to start them off with really basic classes in math and English. We did this for a few reasons. One, we needed to get those classes started so they could actually get to their transferable courses. Because they were a high school student and did not have a high school diploma, the community college wouldn't know where to place them in those classes. So they can't just start at a class that would be college age, considering the student had finished 4 years of high school. You can't just automatically do that with a high school student. So you either bring a diploma or you test out of those classes. We decided not to matriculate those classes and test out of them. We decided to do those very basic classes in math and English, even though they were not transferable. I think only the grade was on the transcript, not the GPA, and they did not provide any credits towards their university experience. We opted to do them anyway because it allowed them to get used to the community college environment, and because we felt that It was an easy enough class. It was a good way for them to shore up any information, any gaps in their knowledge for English and for math that were missed in our homeschool experience. Starting with a really basic class allowed us just to shore that up and make sure that as they started their transferable classes, they weren't struggling. They weren't trying to learn information they hadn't learned before, and they also weren't struggling with the college experience. So starting those really basic classes gave them about a semester to get used to their college experience, which they got used to it very quickly. They had not been in a classroom setting like that before, and most of my students hadn't been in a classroom setting with other students almost at all, not in this capacity, with homework, quizzes, tests, communication with professors, via email. Most of it was virtual for the communication and turning in homework. A lot of that was done online, and then taking quizzes and tests were mostly done in person. But navigating all of that, learning how to use a Scantron, learning test taking skills, all of that occurred in that first semester of their college experience, which I was happy was with a very basic class. It didn't take long for my students to be used to the college environment. In fact, I think they really liked it. One of the things that I thought helped them be successful in their college years has to do with two aspects of our homeschooling. One was that we created an environment that really encouraged a love of learning. Now, it wasn't like that all the time. Of course, there were challenges, but for the most part, I feel that the way that we did our learning, our homeschool, our hands-on projects, our main lesson blocks, any park days or field trips that we did, I feel really made their homeschool years one in which they had a love of learning. They weren't doing school for a grade or to pass an exam or to get to the next grade level. We really didn't have any of those things. We barely had any homework. We didn't really have tests or quizzes or homework. I mean, anytime there was quote unquote homework, it was part of our homeschool. So they didn't have those kinds of deadlines or that kind of rigor or that kind of expectation from the school environment that they were in. So when they finally got to their college experience, that was all really exciting for them. And because they had a love of learning and were in school for learning, they also made really great students. And so teachers really enjoyed having students that wanted to be there, wanted to learn, enjoyed learning. It's not to say that students don't want to learn or don't enjoy learning in other environments, but I did notice that this was something that was different than my school experience, where we were mostly in school to get the good grades, to pass the classes, to have the great GPA so that we could get to university, and then the whole cycle starts again so that you're getting those grades because grades are on a curve. And so there was so much competition, we sort of lost sight of the enjoyment of learning and the love of learning and the desire to learn. It was more about the grades than the learning. One other thing that I think really helped them in their college experience was that in our homeschool experience, we did not have the rigor that you would normally find in a brick and mortar school. And so either in a public school or a private school environment where there is more demands on the students, I felt like we did not have that. So my students didn't burn out when they were in their school. They weren't finally getting to college and saying, finally I got to college and now I just don't have the energy to continue because I have been working so hard in my younger grades. My students didn't have that. So by the time they got to college, they were really welcoming that challenge. They weren't burnt out. They had the energy. I think they actually liked being challenged in their work. They liked doing the homework. They liked having the tests. And I say like in a very loose way. They really sort of took that challenge on in a way that I think that they might not have done had they been doing that all their younger years. If they had been doing that all of their homeschooling life or all of their education, they might not be so excited about it at the college level. So they weren't burnt out, which meant that they still had the energy to really dive in at a time when you really want your students to put their all into education. They were ready to do that. It also meant that they weren't skipping class, they weren't to class late. There wasn't this idea of not going to school, not doing homework. Like none of that really crossed their mind. They were good students. They did their homework. They turned in their homework. They did their tests. They weren't late to class. They attended class. And all of these things, I think, was part of it being sort of novel for them. They hadn't been doing that all of their years before. So it was sort of exciting and different for them, which meant that they had a little more longevity before burnout, more time to really enjoy the process, more time to enjoy the environment, and to still enjoy learning and have that love of learning and be there to learn, not just to get grades. Of course, they needed to get good grades to move on to other classes and have a good GPA. So very quickly, they understood the idea of mastering information so that they could take a test. But that whole process did take about part of a semester, I should say. The study habits, the classroom etiquette, all of that took a little time to learn. There was one instance when my son took a midterm and took the midterm, turned it in, left, and he got an A, but he realized that he had missed something and it was a very silly error. And so he hadn't really learned the idea of going back and checking your work before turning it in when it comes to a test. Things that you just sort of learn naturally when you're in a school environment of checking your tests and making sure that if it is a Scantron that you've thoroughly erased so that it doesn't get marked incorrectly, things like that. He learned very quickly and then excelled even more and did really great in his classes once he learned those few things. Also, those beginner classes, those prerequisites to those transferable classes ended up being really easy, which was good and bad. And I'm going to talk more about the good and bad associated to those easy classes in community college as well as the environment. So I encourage you to check out that video. It's in the description box below if you want to see some of the pros and cons to being in university or in college when you're younger versus when you're there with your peers, and the classes being easy in community college versus more challenging. That actually affected my children, and I encourage you to check out the video in which I talk about it. So now my students have taken those very basic classes. What comes next? Well, now they are looking to take the classes that they need that are going to be transferable classes. And actually, they're really hard to get into. They're hard to get into because my students are high school students taking community college classes with hundreds, thousands of students who are meant to be there. They're not high school students, they are college students, and they are going to get the classes first. So we're thinking, this is going to be a problem if my students are still in high school trying to get those classes. They really need to exit out. Now, when it came to my first child, my first student who did this, he had exited out of high school almost immediately. And so it was really easy for him to get the classes that he needed because we were in charge of signing off on those classes. And then once we realized that, hey, actually he could just exit out, like why are we waiting? Why doesn't he just exit out? We did that immediately because as a high school student, you're limited to your course load, and that means that you can't take too many classes. And if you can't take too many classes, it's going to take you longer to get through all the classes that you need to get through. Not just because some of them are year by year, but you simply are just limited to 2 classes a semester when you could really maybe take 3, possibly 4. 4 might be a little bit much, but at least you could take 3 classes per semester. And so we decided early on that we just need to exit out of high school because this is a hurdle in getting the classes that we need. When it came to my second son, we were realizing that in addition to it being challenging to get the classes that we want, the classes are filling up very very quickly. So not only do we have to deal with the hurdle of getting all of the approvals from teachers or from us in order to take the classes, by the time all of that paperwork went through, those classes were filling up. And then we're trying to find other classes, and maybe the professors weren't as good or the timings weren't great. We want to make sure that they were going during daylight hours. We didn't want them taking any classes at night. We wanted them taking good professors who were fair, who taught well. We didn't want professors who had bad reviews, who didn't teach well. We really wanted them to have professors where they could learn the material they needed to learn so they could move on to the next classes. So again, for those reasons as well, choosing to test out ended up being our best choice. But with our second son, he stayed in high school taking community college courses longer than my first son, and very quickly we realized that wasn't a good option. As soon as they're eligible to test out, we want them testing out. And that for us is the beginning of 10th grade. We feel really good by 10th grade that they look like they can be there with other students. We feel like we've completed all of their middle school requirements for education, like all of the things that I wanted to do. By requirements, I mean all of the classes that I wanted to teach them. And honestly, there are still many that I did not do. And there are still many holes in their education. That is part of life. That is part of this journey. Even if your students were in a brick and mortar school, they would probably still end up with holes in their education. But as long as I had completed all of the things that I wanted them to do by the end of 9th grade, then I was happy with them exiting high school and going directly to community college. I felt like that was going to be the best choice for them to get the classes they needed, the rigor that they needed, and transfer to university with the best chances of getting into university. And that was another reason why we opted to do community college versus finishing out high school, is because I didn't think that they would be able to transfer directly to university straight out of 4 years of high school. Now, I thought this because that's what I saw around me. A lot of A+ students were still getting rejected from university and then ending up doing 2 years of community college anyway before transferring to university. And so I thought, I don't think my children with the environment that we were providing in homeschool would have the rigor to match that of their peers, would have the extracurricular activities and the community service. I didn't think that they would have the resume they needed in order to go directly to university, at least the universities that we wanted for them that were local. So for that reason, we were looking at, well, what's the next best way to ensure that they would get into university? And the next best way, if they're not going directly out of high school, is to do 2 years of community college and then transfer. So rather than wait for them to finish high school, doing that during their high school age, then transferring to university when their peers would be entering university, only they would have been entering as a junior, not a freshman, felt like a better option for us. So now we have to exit them out of high school. And at the time, they did the California High School Proficiency Exam. We call it the CHESP. It is no longer available in the state. There is a different exam that they have now. When my children were taking the CHESP, so 3 out of my 4 children have already done this and have already taken the test and passed it. And by the way, at the time, the test was in 3 parts. And they had a written portion, an essay portion, an English portion, and a math portion. And what was really great was that if you didn't pass just one of the sections, you could just retake that one section without retaking the whole test. I actually liked the CHESP for more than just that reason. I found it to be a really straightforward test without tricky questions. When my students were younger in like elementary and middle school, and they would take state tests or school tests, and they did take state and school tests because for a period of time, we were enrolled in a charter school. We were homeschooling, but we were going through the public school route versus the private school route. So there are a couple of different ways to homeschool in California. And of course, each state is unique. And in California, at least during the times that we were homeschooling, you could either go the public school route or the private school route. And within the public or private school, you have brick and mortar schools, or you can homeschool like offsite. And so we had that option. And so when we were doing our public school route for homeschooling, they did require state and school tests, which you could opt out of, but I didn't mind taking them. And so there were a couple of years when I was looking at the questions that were being offered to the students, and I found them kind of tricky, and I didn't really like the way the tests were set up. I felt like when the students were taking the tests, I felt like the questions might have been straightforward, but I don't think the answers were. And in some cases, I thought the answers were like there's a right answer, there's a good answer, there's a better answer, and then there's a wrong answer. And that's the way I saw a lot of the questions. And for that reason, I didn't really like the way that the school and state testing was for my students. However, I was very happy with the CHESP and the way that the questions were for those tests. And so those tests include the math, the English, and the essay. They did not include history or science, which I do think now they include those. So for that reason, I felt like the CHESP was a really great gauge of, do you know enough just to get on with life? Do you know enough to go to trade school, community college, or just get a job? I really like the way that the CHESP was set up. It is different now, so I can't comment on the way that the test is currently. And of course, the rules and laws change. And so at the time, this is the test that my students could take. You had to sign up for it. You had to either be a particular age or have permission. There were test sites locally. There were only certain test dates throughout the year, and there was a fee. So there were a few things around the testing that was required for you to be able to take the test. Once you took the test and you passed it, you were given a certificate that showed that you had completed high school, like you could exit high school. So it's not a diploma, it's a certificate that then you could take to your community college. And at that point, they would then change you from a high school student to a college student, which means that your coursework would open up. You could take more classes and you would have a registration window that was far better than you had before. But here's the thing, you don't actually have to submit that paperwork. If you took your exam, passed it, but decided, you know what, I think I want to stay in high school, you certainly could do that. At the time, you could. Things may change now. And so you could just turn in that certificate when you were ready to take on that college level coursework. Because most of my students took the CHESP after they had started taking community college classes, it was actually in their favor that they had taken those basic math and English classes because those actually helped them pass their CHESP. So all three of my students took math and English either at the basic level or they matriculated out and took one course level above the basic level. But either way, taking that math and English really helped them be able to pass their exam easily because anything that we had missed in teaching them that might have been on the test, they were able to get by taking those basic classes in community college. So there was a benefit to taking those classes first as well. One thing that was nice about the CHESP was that there are 3 sections to it. So if you felt like you needed a little bit more time to complete the test, like you ran out of time and you just couldn't do your essay, for instance, or you ran out of time and you didn't feel like you didn't do great in the math, that's okay, because if whatever one you fail, you can always take that one again, and then you'll have a little more time to finish that off. So that is another nice thing about the CHESP at the time, was that it did allow for that flexibility for the students who did need more time, but you did have to pay for the test again, and you did have to wait until that test period opened up again. So now you are fully in community college, your CHESP is done, or your exit exam for high school is done. You can start getting those transferable classes. You can start doing more classes if you need to. What this allowed us to do was to start to pack our students' schedule with the classes they would need in order to transfer to university. This also meant that we could gauge how much time they would need. Because they were now out of high school, they could add more classes to their schedule, even taking summer classes, which meant that they got their AA degree. They graduated from community college the same time their peers would be graduating from high school. Now, still with those credits and getting their AA degree, it doesn't ensure that they're going to be able to transfer to university. That required a lot of effort in making sure that they had the classes they needed in order to transfer, and that they were going to be transferring to a university that accepted those credits. So even if you had all of your coursework and your credits, if it wasn't recognized by the university that you wanted to transfer to, then you would have to take those courses again or transfer to a different university. The other thing is that we really wanted to ensure that our students were going to be able to get into university, and more specifically into a local university. And so we joined a program at the community college that guaranteed admission to their university based on either their major, their grades, and their coursework. So this particular program was only available, like certain community colleges and universities have this program, so you really have to look into it. Each program may be a little bit different. You have to look into your local community colleges and see which ones work with that local university. And then it's only for certain majors, and you have to have a certain GPA. You have to apply for it. You have to have a good GPA before you apply. You have to maintain a good GPA throughout that duration of, it's usually about a year prior to transferring. And then at that point, you're guaranteed admission to that university for that major that you applied for. And this was a really great option for us because after all of that work, we really wanted to help them get into that university, that local university that we wanted for them. And so doing this particular program was a way to ensure that. Now, not all programs are the same. Even the program that we did with our oldest child wasn't available for our next two children. And so things again change. They differ year to year. And I highly encourage you to find out what those programs are. You can talk to college counselors. You can join homeschool groups. You can talk to university counselors. You can look at the university websites for more information as well. And you will probably need to get more information than you need just to sort through it all, because a lot of times we got conflicting information, which made it really challenging for us to figure out how to navigate this. And even once we figured it out, then things changed with our next children. So it made it even more challenging because you're expecting something to be the way it is because you've already experienced that, and then it was different. Okay, so now the kids are finally in community college. They can finally take all of their coursework. They know the coursework that they need to take. They're sort of narrowing down their options and putting most of their eggs in one basket so they can really go towards the university that they want. Because if you leave all of your doors open, you may find that you're not prepared for any one course because you spend so much more time at community college, because you're taking a variety of classes, wanting to keep all of those doors open. You sort of have to narrow it down if you have the goal in mind of trying to get into a particular university or for a particular major or in a particular timeline. We didn't want to waste a lot of time in their high school experience going to community college, and so we opted to really streamline the classes they were taking so that we chose classes that would meet the requirements for both types of universities that they were applying for, so that they wouldn't have to double up on classes and take more time during that community college experience. I hope that this helps you understand a little bit about how we chose to homeschool our high school student through exiting early and going to community college instead. I encourage you to check out the blog post that accompanies this video, where you can find more of these videos as well as information. You can find the link to that blog post in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram and now on TikTok at Pepper and Pine.